Hello, my brother. Welcome to the Great Man Within podcast. Every episode is designed to help you discover and live the great man within you. I asked my good friend Talia Thomas, who's an African-American woman, that if she could address the demographic of this audience, of this podcast, that are white male listeners, and if she had a message to deliver us about how we could get off of the sideline and become actively anti-racist in our work and in our support, then what would she want to see from us? And here is what she said she needed from us.
More strong white men coming out and boldly saying this is wrong and boldly saying, I don't care if you're going to follow me or not. Like, if you don't want to be my friend anymore, that's okay. I'm still going to say that this is wrong, and calling out other white men to do the same.
Now, Talia's message is abundantly clear, and it's also not novel. The Black community has been speaking for generations to the white men who have positions of authority in government, in law, in media, even in our own businesses, at our local levels. White men who still own the vast majority of power pretty much across every major institution and minor institution that we look at, for white men to step up and be an active part of the support. Now, what I have had a chance to see over these last few weeks is that more and more white men, including myself, are ready to take a much bigger, much more active, much more vocal role. And at the same time, especially over these last few days and having deep conversations with many men and women of the white community, I found that white people are afraid to stay silent, but terrified to speak up, and are being stuck in a place of paralysis. So this episode is engineered to helping you overcome that fear, why you can't allow discomfort and fear about the potential backlash or the potential discomfort to keep you sitting on the sideline. Now, while I'm grateful that you are listening to me and listening to this podcast, ultimately, whenever you are listening to me talk about matters of race, I want you to do so with the intention to eventually bypass me and go to the experts, those who have dedicated their lives and their careers to talking about anti-racism, to the Black activists and the leaders and the authors, and even just your friends and people that you've surrounded yourself with who have lived their entire lives confronted with racism on a daily basis in big and small ways. My mission is to be a conduit to, a bridge builder to the experts who have lived their entire lives facing racism in big and small ways in their everyday life, to the experts who have dedicated their lives and their careers to anti-racist practices, to challenging legislation, to building equity, to making right the injustices that are suffered on a daily basis. And I am still new on my journey. I spent most of my life oblivious to the ways that my own silence and my own blind spots have perpetuated this system that is unjust. And so as I am on this journey, it's my intention to be able to make some of these concepts more approachable for you, to pique your interest and curiosity, to get you on the path so that then you can go and learn from the real experts, the real change agents, so that we can all make a difference together. Now let's get to the first question, which is the single most asked question that I've heard from the white community over the last week, and it's this. I'm afraid to stay silent, but I'm terrified to speak up. I feel like no matter what I say or do, it's going to be criticized. I've seen so many people on social media try and be beaten down, be beaten back. It feels like a catch-22. What do I do about that? Before I address the how you navigate that seeming catch-22 or that double bind, which it's not, but before I get to the how of that, I think it's important to first address the dangers of continuing to stay silent. Dr. Martin Luther King once said, "We will have to repent in this generation, not merely for the hateful words and actions of the bad people, but for the appalling silence of the good people." Now, I'm going to be reading you some passages from a book that I'm working my way through right now, which is called Me and White Supremacy by Layla F. Saad. It's a book on how to combat racism, change the world, and become a good ancestor. And I'll talk a little bit more about it at the end of this episode because it's a resource I'm going to be recommending to everyone. Now, there is a term for white people not speaking out, for standing on the sidelines, and it's called white silence, right? White silence is when we don't speak up. It's what Dr. Martin Luther King is talking about, the good people who are keeping silent and as a result are complicit in perpetuating a system of injustice, right? A system that is unfairly rigged in the favor of one racial group at the detriment and at the expense of everyone else. Now, why do you need to look at white silence? These are some passages from the book, Me and White Supremacy. On the surface of it, white silence seems benign. And if not benign, then it could at least be believed to be a stance of neutrality. But white silence is anything but neutral. Rather, it is a method of self-protection and therefore also the protection of the dynamics of white supremacy. Here is a radical idea that I would like you to understand. White silence is violence. It actively protects the system. It says that I am okay with the way things are because they do not negatively affect me and because I enjoy the benefits I receive with white privilege. All right, so now this is Dominic speaking again. When I started to see my silence as complicity in perpetuating a system that was condoning violence and taking the lives of black men without recourse, that was condoning a system that has mass incarceration of one specific racial group in our country, that inordinately tears apart families, that puts people into prison wrongly, who puts them in for longer sentences and terms than they do for other racial groups. When my silence, when my own discomfort and fear of being criticized or fear of being emotionally attacked, when my fear kept me silent, then I was actually perpetuating a system of violence against others, where lives were being torn apart, where lives were being taken because I'm afraid to speak up, because I'm afraid to say something. And I lived most of my life that way. When I started to recognize that my silence equaled violence, I could no longer stand for it. And of course, there's still some shame that I'm working through, that for decades of my life, I remained on the sideline. But that shame is something that I'm going to have to contend with. We all are, as we have these deeper conversations about race. Now, this behavior of staying silent for fear of being attacked or criticized while other people are losing their lives and having their families torn apart is an example, a prime example of what Robin DiAngelo would call white fragility. Robin DiAngelo has spent 25 years as an anti-racist teacher. She wrote the book, White Fragility, Why It's So Hard for White People to Talk About Racism, which is another book I'm going to be recommending at the end of this episode. It's one of the most important books that I've ever read on this topic. And what she defines white fragility as is, white fragility is a state in which even a minimum amount of racial stress becomes intolerable, triggering a range of defensive moves. And she says that it is white people's responsibility to become less fragile. And in order to do that, Robin DiAngelo says that we must develop racial stamina. Right? This is a really important term, racial stamina, which is the ability to talk openly, constructively, and civilly about race. Robin DiAngelo wrote the foreword of the book, Me and White Supremacy, and in that she says, "It has been my consistent experience leading anti-racist education over the last 25 years that most white people don't really want to know what to do about racism if it will require anything of them that is inconvenient or uncomfortable." And so that brings us back to the original question of I'm afraid to stay silent, but terrified to speak out. What do I do? And this is exactly where Robin DiAngelo would say it becomes inconvenient and uncomfortable for white people, and most of us will shrink back from stepping on the field. It's inconvenient because what's being asked of us is time-consuming, is emotional, it's energetic. We are being asked to do the homework. We are being asked to read the books, to sit and listen, to hear stuff that we may not want to hear. It's uncomfortable because we're going to be saying stuff and going into uncharted territories that we haven't been before, where we're going to meet resistance, where it's going to be uncomfortable. Like as Talea said before, when we are speaking out against racism, there are going to be people who are going to come back at you, and you're going to have to make some tough decisions. I've already had to make some tough decisions in my life in speaking up and speaking out and losing relationships as a result of it. This is where it becomes inconvenient and uncomfortable. But if we are actually committed to building racial stamina, the ability to talk openly, constructively, and civilly about race, then we have to be willing to commit to the fact that this is going to be inconvenient and uncomfortable. Now, I want to help you break down what I've seen gone wrong when white people have tried to step up in support of Black Lives Matter, businesses stepping up and speaking out in support of Black Lives Matter and being called onto the mat for the way that they've done that. There's a term called performative allyship. And there's this awesome diagram that I saw posted this morning by a psychologist. Her name is Sirat K. Chawla. And I'm going to be linking this in the show notes. And she talks about, I'm going to read off some of the characteristics of what performative allyship is, which basically means I'm not really an ally. I'm just performing like I'm one. I haven't done my homework. I haven't done the inner work. I haven't listened closely enough. I'm off tempo. So here are some of the things that she said that could be categorized as performative allyship. Number one, everyone's doing it, so I have to, right? That almost even addresses this part of I'm afraid to stay silent, like where your motivations to speak up are because you're afraid of looking bad for staying silent versus an actual desire to speak up because you know it's right? Like what is driving you? And this is where businesses have fallen apart. Businesses are afraid to be silent right now, so they speak up. But then when they're called out onto the mat of, okay, yeah, you really believe in Black Lives Matter and equality, then show me your organizational chart. Is there anyone at the top of your business who is diverse? Are there any Black leadership programs in your organization? Right? Like, are you Black friendly? Are you people of color friendly? And show me the proof. Don't just say you are. Don't just say that you believe in this movement. Have you actually lived it? And and they're right to get those questions, right? And this is where in performative allyship on this document I'm reading to you, it's where the PR and the branding organizations, the public profile management speaks first versus like the essence of, I truly believe that we all deserve equality. I truly believe that we are experiencing travesties and injustices. If you're only doing this from an optics perspective, that's another indicator of performative allyship. Again, that goes to the fear driving your desire to speak out and nothing else. If you're benefiting from it in some way, directing some like direct benefit, one of the things that I'm not doing with this podcast is I'm not going out and actually advertising this podcast because I'm providing space for the movement, for the revolution, for Black leaders and Black voices. I'm not pointing arrows to my business. What I'm doing is I'm making sure those of you who are listening, like you can find it if you want it to be found, but I'm not taking the tension away from others. I'm not using this as a springboard to make myself look like a really woke dude. I care about this, right? And if you are putting yourself at the center of this versus, like we talked about before in one of the last episodes, one of my key principles is I'm playing a supporting role in this. I'm not the starring role. I'm not putting myself at the center. Like I said at the beginning of this episode, my job is to build to the experts. I'm hoping that you're listening at all times with the intention of bypassing my conversations around race and eventually getting to the experts. And then there's this other concept called in performative allyship, she also points out what's called virtue signaling. Virtue signaling, like, hey, look at how great I am because I donated to this cause. Look at me, I'm good. I'm going to post my donation receipt. And by the way, I just did that the other day when I posted about donating to the George Floyd Memorial Fund. And my intention was not to look like a good guy. It was my intention to say, like, here's where you can go to go and donate. But I posted my receipt. I took away the number, like I blacked out the number that I donated. But even that called me on the mat to say, am I posting that for like an ego hit? So that I look like a woke dude, that I'm a guy that's like on the, like I'm on the team and I want you to recognize me? Or am I actually doing it to say to others, hey, this is really important. Here's where I went. Here's a quick link that you can go and take care of business. Now, here's what authentic allyship looks like. And this is also from Sirat K. Chawla's Instagram post today. She said that you are educating yourself. You're educating yourself. You're doing the homework, right? This is a part of it. And also reading the books, watching the documentaries, following others, and having deep, detailed conversations around race and standing up are all part of the education process. She says that you're taking risks and holding yourself and others accountable, doing what's inconvenient and also uncomfortable. You're sitting with the discomfort. It's not about you, right? These are all parts of authentic allyship. You're committed in the long term to anti-racist work, not just now when it's front and center. We're examining our own privileges and using our privilege to help, right? And you're going to hear in a future episode what Talia Thomas also had to say about white privilege and how it's a beautiful superpower if we learn how to use it and use our superpower to provide benefit, provide a space, a platform for other Black voices to be heard and for us to create change. And then finally, authentic allyship, where it's not about you and it's not about virtue signaling, right? Like it's not about, hey, look at how great I am because I'm doing this and because I'm talking out about this. It's because this is what we believe in and it's the right thing to do. And the last thing I'll say about this particular question is if you are still uncertain about what your first move is to speak out publicly, the first step is to acknowledge how long it's taken you to break your silence. I am sorry that I've been silent for so long. I am here now. I am committing to the long game. I am educating myself. Here's how. And by the way, let me share with you someone else's work. Someone who is actively anti-racist, an educator, hopefully someone who is Black, giving them the stage on your platform to showcase their work. That is a beautiful opportunity for you to say, I've been asleep at the wheel. I'm sorry, but I'm here now. Here's what I'm committed to. And then showcasing someone else's work and let that speak for itself. In the episode that I released a couple of days ago called Antiracism for the White Man Ready to Step Off the Sidelines, I shared with you my 4 guiding principles about how I'm going to be showing up for the long game in helping be part of the solution, actively anti-racist. The first guiding principle is racism will not die. It must be killed. Racism is not going to die on its own. It needs to be killed. And B. Arthur was the one who reminded me of that when we brought her on in February to have a conversation about how white men can have better conversations about race. And I encourage you to go back and listen to that episode. The second principle is I will not let discomfort keep me silent. I will not let discomfort keep me silent. Our whole episode today was really about that. I am willing to go forward, to fuck up, to do the wrong thing so that I can learn quickly. That requires some inner strength and stability and the ability to drop my defensiveness and listen to the truth that's coming back at me. What is true? What part of the criticism that I'm receiving is true? And to focus on that, not to be defensive. Number 3, I commit to playing the long game. And I read you a quote from a message that my friend Ngazi sent to me a few days ago. She said, recognize that our pain is not just a trend. It's not just for the moment. It has been here for many, many years. Therefore, this work must continue for many, many years. And I can guarantee you this will be a part of my life for the remainder of my days on this planet. Guaranteed. And then fourth and finally, I'm playing a support role, not a starring role. I'm not at the center of this movement. I am a bridge builder. I am using my platform to bring the experts to you, to bring the messages to you that have been trying to be heard for so long, that have fallen on deaf ears. But I know that you are listening because you're ready. You're ready to hear something you haven't heard before. I know that I am too, and I'm ready to take action differently in my life. The Black community has given us some pretty loud and clear messages over these last few weeks, and I want to synthesize about 5 of the points that I've heard loud and clear from them. Number 1, make space for this movement. Make space for the voices that need to be heard, which means if you're going back to normal, just posting on social media the way that you've been posting, it's just kind of like, here's my life and here's this, then you are drawing attention away from the movement. You're not making space for the voices that need to be heard at a time when they've never been louder, at a time where they finally have had the spotlight placed upon them for the first time in such a big way. Continue to make space. Number 2, educate yourself. It is not black people's responsibility to educate us. They're exhausted from having to educate us. There may be black people in your lives who have the capacity and the desire right now to answer your questions. Don't expect it. Even in your best intended efforts of reaching out to them to see how they're doing and to see if you can learn, it becomes an obligation or a burden for them. And the best example I can give you of this, and this is not a racial example from my life, but 6 or 7 years ago, when my mother had a thoracic aortic aneurysm and had to go to the Cleveland Clinic to get an operation where she was out of commission for 6 or 7 days, I had like 100 well-intentioned people, family members, reach out to me with all of their emotional distress and anguish, wanting updates, constantly like bringing their emotional burdens to me that I had to now carry. And I'm the son, right? I'm the one who's already dealing with all the fear of potentially something going awry with my mother. And now I have to keep these people updated on a moment-to-moment basis, right? It wasn't my job or responsibility, but it gave me a moment to reflect on, am I doing this to the black people in my life? And I can tell you for a fact, in having spoken to a number of black people that I'm close to, they're fucking exhausted. So go do the damn homework. Let's do the damn homework together. Number 3, support black-owned businesses. Like, can you look for black businesses that, and actually in 5 minutes, I've got to go because one of my favorite people, Joe, who runs Premier Sports Recovery, who I've been working with for over a year and a half, who's an African-American small business owner. He's coming over here to help me do some stretching, right, around fascial release. Can you look at black-owned businesses and buy, whether it's the local restaurant getting delivery? Can you go out of your way to support local black businesses? Number 4, they want a platform. Give black people a platform for their voices to be heard. And I already talked about that before. If you don't know what to say, step aside, find someone who is a black leader and an activist, and give them the space on your platform so that your followers, right, or the people that you do business with, your clients, whoever, the men in your life that you care about, that they can hear from that person. And then 5th and finally, share their work, right? And I kind of just basically hit on this, but go out, share the work. And I'll leave you with 2 book recommendations. This kind of gets to, what do I do now? I'm overwhelmed by all the information that's coming at me about all of the stuff I can consume. If you believe in what I've been sharing with you, and if you trust me to kind of filter out and distill down some of the most important stuff to start on your journey, then you can listen to me when I share with you these 2 books you must buy and you must read. Like, you can't get any way around it. Like, you need to read these 2 books and you need to prioritize them now. Number 1, and I would do it in this order. Number 1, White Fragility by Robin DiAngelo. And if you remember Giovanni Beckford, I brought him on the show back in December. He's an African-American man who consumes 60, 65 books a year. He's amazing. And he did a whole podcast on how to read and retain books. I reached out to him the other day. He's actually going to be speaking to the Great Man Mastermind tonight on these issues of race. And I asked him, what's the number 1 book that you would recommend to white people if they want to get into this? And he said, White Fragility by Robin DiAngelo. Why it's so hard for white people to talk about racism. That's the book you begin with. At the same time, I want you to buy Me and White Supremacy by Layla F. Saad. I'm going to be linking these in the show notes. And that is like the next book to read because it's a workbook. There's a 28-day challenge. Each of the sections are broken up into, like, here's a key term, like white privilege. Here's what it is. And then there's journal prompts. It's a working exercise for you to actually do the work and not just stay stuck in an intellectual way. These 2 books are doing the homework. It's certainly not all of the work that's required, but these are 2 profound, really powerful early stage steps, and they will give you a lot more clarity around what's happening in our world today, around how to interact with people of color, and in particular, the black men and women in your lives right now. And it will make sense of what your next steps are in terms of educating yourself. Remember, a great man creates environments where he and those he cares about can thrive. There is no way that we can be great men without addressing the environment that we have created in this country and in many other parts of the world that have marginalized entire races of people that have destroyed families, that have taken lives without recourse. As great men and aspiring great men, we must be on the path of helping to right these wrongs, to speaking out against injustices. Will you join us on this path? To my Black listeners and people of color, I really want to hear from you about how these conversations are going. How can I do better? How can I be a better supporter? Where have I misspoken and misstepped? Please share with me through reaching out on doinnerwork.com or emailing me directly at dominic@dominicq.com. I will read your emails directly. That's dominic@dominicq.com. And for my white listeners, the white community, reach out to me if these are resonating with you. What are you starting to learn about yourself as you listen to these episodes? What has been jarring for you? What changes have you made? How have you spoken out? What challenges are you experiencing? Email me at dominic@dominicq.com. This is the time that we need to come together and support one another. dominic@dominicq.com.